It was a Tuesday night, one of those ordinary evenings when life feels comfortably predictable. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels, trying to decide between some mindless action movie or a rerun of Seinfeld. Claire, my wife of 8 years, was in the kitchen, or so I thought. Her phone, however, was not. It buzzed once, twice, then a flurry of messages lit up the screen. Claire had left it on the coffee table while she went to grab something from the car. A simple mistake on her part, but for me, it was the crack that started shattering the facade of my life. The name on the screen caught my eye, Brandon, gym trainer, flexed biceps. My gut tightened. Innocent? Sure, if you're a fool. But there was another name too, Alyssa's birthday planning group, which struck me as odd because, as far as I knew, Claire didn't have any close friends named Alyssa. I'm not proud of it, but curiosity, or maybe that primal instinct that something was off, got the better of me. I grabbed the phone, entered the passcode I'd known for years, and opened the message threads. What I found turned my stomach. Brandon wasn't just her gym trainer, he was her partner in late-night cardio sessions. The texts were loaded with disgusting innuendos. One message read, "Can't wait for Thursday. The things I'm going to do to you. Hope the hubby's as clueless as usual. Face with tears of joy." I felt like the floor beneath me was falling away, but that wasn't the worst of it. The so-called birthday planning group turned out to be Claire's code name for another man, Evan, one of her co-workers. Their messages were just as vile, dripping with the kind of betrayal that makes your blood run cold. One text from Evan burned into my memory. "Tell Brandon he's got competition. You've got too much energy to be wasted on just one guy." The audacity. The cruelty. And the way they laughed at me. Before I could process it all, Claire walked back into the room, holding a bottle of wine as if it were just another normal night. "Hey, babe, want a glass?" she asked, her tone so casual it made me sick. I looked up at her, phone in hand. She froze for a split second but recovered quickly, too quickly. "What's wrong?" she asked, playing the role of the clueless wife like she deserved an Oscar. I stared at her, heart pounding, fingers trembling. "You tell me, Claire. Who's Brandon? And while we're at it, who the hell is Evan?" Her face hardened, the facade crumbling in an instant. No denial, no apology, just defiance. "Oh, for God's sake, Logan," she snapped. "Don't go digging through my phone if you can't handle what you find." That was it. That was her response to 8 years of marriage and vows that were supposed to mean something. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted, the rage boiling over. "You've been sneaking around with not one, but 2 guys. And mocking me while you do it?" She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. It's not like I killed someone. Maybe if you weren't so boring all the time, I wouldn't need to sneak around." My fists clenched at my sides. This wasn't just betrayal, it was cruelty. She didn't even have the decency to lie her way out of it. Instead, she threw it in my face, as if I deserved it. "Claire," I said through gritted teeth, "do you even hear yourself? You're blaming me for your cheating?" Her expression didn't change. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a sip, and smirked. "Look, Logan, I've moved on. Maybe it's time you did too." Moved on? I felt like my world was ending, and she was acting like this was some minor inconvenience. But even in my anger, I could feel something deeper, an ache, a raw, hollow pain that no amount of shouting could fix. For the next hour, she gaslit me, deflected, and even laughed at my outrage. When I asked why, she shrugged and said, "Maybe I just got tired of pretending you were enough." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in a quiet, resolute way. I wasn't going to let her crush me. I wasn't going to let her make me the fool anymore. She thought she had all the power, but she had no idea what was coming next. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of her, not because of the betrayal, but because of the rage, the white-hot, bone-deep fury coursing through my veins. Claire went to bed as if nothing had happened. She didn't even bother with an apology or attempt to explain herself. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last few months with new clarity. The unexplained late-night work meetings. The sudden enthusiasm for the gym when she'd never been the workout type. The way she'd started using words like babe and sweetheart less with me and more with her phone. I'd been blind, sure. But not anymore. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't a clear one, hell, I didn't even know what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to roll over and let her walk all over me. I was done being the joke in her twisted game. Claire strolled into the kitchen around 8 a.m., still wearing that smug smirk like she owned the world. She didn't say a word about the argument last night, just poured herself some coffee and scrolled through her phone. I couldn't help myself. "Tell me," I said, leaning against the counter, "do Brandon and Evan know about each other? Or are you playing them for fools too?" She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Are we really doing this again? God, Logan, let it go. You're acting pathetic." Pathetic. That word stung like a slap to the face, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I smiled, a tight, humorless grin. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm just getting started." Before she could respond, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I spent the next few hours making calls. The first was to my lawyer, Tom, a no-nonsense guy I'd known since college. He wasn't surprised by my call, he said he'd seen it all before. I laid everything out for him, the texts, the cheating, the sheer lack of remorse. "She's not just unfaithful, Tom," I said, pacing my driveway. "She's cruel. Vindictive. I'm not just divorcing her, I want her out of my life." Tom's reply was simple: "Then let's make it happen." The next call was to a locksmith. I had no intention of letting her bring Brandon or Evan, or whoever else she had on the side, back into my home. By the time I returned, Claire was gone. Her car was in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be seen. Her phone, however, was on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have stooped so low, but after what I'd found the night before, I figured all bets were off. I opened her phone, same passcode as always, and started digging. What I found made my blood boil all over again. There were more messages, of course. More dirty little secrets. Brandon bragging about how he'd never seen a husband so clueless. Evan laughing about how I was probably crying into a beer right now. But there were others, too: photos, receipts, even a screenshot of a calendar marked with little hearts on days she was meeting up. But one thing stood out above all the filth: a message from Brandon to Evan. "So, when are we telling her husband the big news? Or do we just keep letting him embarrass himself?" Big news? My stomach twisted into knots. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. Claire came back later that afternoon, looking as carefree as ever. She didn't even notice the locks had been changed until she tried to open the front door. "What the hell, Logan?" she shouted, banging on the door. I opened it just wide enough to meet her furious glare. "New locks," I said simply. "If you want your stuff, I'll pack it up for you." Her jaw dropped. For the first time since this nightmare began, she actually looked caught off guard. "You're insane," she snapped. "You can't just lock me out of my own house." "It's not your house anymore," I said. "I'm done, Claire. Done with you, done with your lies, and done letting you treat me like dirt." She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, grow up, Logan. You're not man enough to handle me, and that's your problem, not mine." Something in me broke right then. Not in a bad way, but in a freeing way. Her words didn't hurt anymore. They didn't have power over me. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not man enough for you. I'm too honest. Too loyal. Too decent. But you know what? I'm more than enough for myself, and that's all I need." Her face twisted in anger, but I didn't give her a chance to reply. I closed the door in her face and walked away. That night, I called Tom again. I told him I wanted to hit her where it hurt, her wallet, her reputation, and her cushy little life with Brandon and Evan. He told me to gather every piece of evidence I had, and that's exactly what I did. As I sifted through her messages, I noticed something strange, a message chain between her and one of my coworkers, Matt. Turns out, she hadn't just been mocking me with Brandon and Evan, she'd been spreading lies about me at work, too. Suddenly, everything clicked, the snide comments from coworkers, the weird looks during meetings. Claire hadn't just betrayed me, she'd tried to destroy me. The anger was back, but this time, it wasn't just aimless rage. It was focused, sharp, and ready to strike. Tomorrow, I decided, the gloves come off. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something sharper, more refined. Revenge wasn't the right word, it was more about taking back control, reclaiming what little respect I still had for myself. Claire thought she had all the power. She thought she could humiliate me, walk all over me, and get away with it. Today, she was going to learn what happens when you push someone too far. I started with my lawyer, Tom. "I want to go nuclear," I told him. Tom chuckled. Music to my ears. "Let's start by filing for divorce immediately. You've got the evidence, and we'll make sure the judge sees it all, texts, receipts, the whole 9 yards. She won't know what hit her." But that wasn't enough for me. Claire hadn't just cheated, she'd mocked me, humiliated me, and turned my own life into a joke. She didn't deserve a clean break. "Tom," I said, "is there any way to expose this publicly? I want people to know exactly who she is and what she's done." He hesitated. "We'll have to tread carefully to avoid defamation, but there are ways. For example, if she's dragged your name through the mud at work, we can flip the narrative. Get ahead of it. Let me make a few calls." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. For once, I wasn't the one being blindsided. The second phase of my plan began at the office. I'd spent weeks feeling like something was off, coworkers whispering, weird silences when I walked into a room. Now I knew why. Claire had been feeding lies about me to Matt, my colleague. Matt was one of those guys who loved gossip. He wasn't particularly smart, but he was loud, and people listened to him. If Claire had been spreading rumors through him, the damage could be massive. I confronted him during our lunch break. "Matt," I said, leaning over his desk, "we need to talk." He looked up, clearly startled. Sure, Logan. What's up?" "I know you've been talking about me," I said bluntly. "Don't bother denying it, I've seen the messages between you and my wife." His face turned red, and he stammered, I didn't mean anything by it, man." "She said." I cut him off. "I don't care what she said. Here's what you're going to do, you're going to tell everyone in this office that everything she told you was a lie. If I hear so much as a whisper about me from anyone here, I'll make sure HR knows about your little habit of sharing confidential company gossip. Got it?" He nodded so quickly I thought his neck might snap. Satisfied, I walked away. That evening, I decided to tackle the most difficult part of my plan, Brandon and Evan. It wasn't enough to just divorce Claire, I wanted to hit her where it hurt, and those two idiots were part of the equation. I started with Brandon. I'd never met the guy, but I knew where he worked. Claire had mentioned his gym in passing, back when I'd naively thought she was actually there to exercise. I walked into the gym around 7 p.m., the place packed with people lifting weights and running on treadmills. It didn't take long to spot him, tall, muscular, the kind of guy who wore tank tops 2 sizes too small just to show off. "Brandon," I said, walking up to him. He turned, confused. "Yeah? Who's asking?" "I'm Logan," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Claire's husband." His face went pale, and he glanced around nervously. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "You're not getting trouble," I interrupted. "Not yet. But you are going to stay the hell away from her." He opened his mouth to argue, but I leaned in closer. "Here's the deal, I know everything. I've got the texts, the photos, all of it. If I see you near her again, I'll make sure your boss, your clients, and your girlfriend, if you've got one, see it too. Do we understand each other?" He swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah. Yeah, okay." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out. Evan was next. Unlike Brandon, he wasn't a stranger. He worked with Claire, which made him even more dangerous. If she still had access to him at the office, she could continue her games. I called Tom again, explaining the situation. "We can request a formal no-contact order as part of the divorce proceedings," he said. "But if he's involved in workplace misconduct, you can report him to HR. It might get messy, though." "Messy is fine," I said. The next morning, I sent an anonymous email to Claire's HR department, attaching screenshots of her and Evan's messages. Nothing explicit, just enough to show that their relationship was crossing professional boundaries. Within hours, I got a call from Claire. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed. "Do you know what you've done?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "I've made sure you can't drag me through the mud anymore. You wanted me to accept this? Fine. I accept it, but on my terms." She cursed me out and hung up, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control again. By the end of the day, Claire had been placed on leave while HR investigated her inappropriate conduct. Brandon had vanished from her life, and Evan was no longer untouchable. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. I should have known Claire wouldn't go quietly. It wasn't her style. This was the same woman who turned my life into a public joke, after all. Still, I wasn't prepared for just how low she would stoop. The first sign of her retaliation came 2 days after I reported her to HR. I was at work, feeling like I'd finally regained some stability, when I got an email notification from an unknown address. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Enjoy the show." I clicked it, and my blood ran cold. Attached was a video, a private moment between Claire and me from years ago, back when things were still good. It wasn't explicit, but it was intimate enough to humiliate me if it got out. And Claire knew it. Below the video was a single sentence, "Play nice, or this goes public." I stared at the screen, fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. She was blackmailing me. Not content with ruining my marriage, my home, and my reputation at work, she was now threatening to destroy what little dignity I had left. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. She wanted a reaction, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. That night, I called Tom again. "She's escalated," I said, pacing the living room. "She sent me a video, something personal, and she's threatening to release it." Tom let out a low whistle. "That's a new one." "Okay, here's the deal, blackmail is a serious crime. We can report her to the authorities, but you need to decide if you're ready for that level of escalation. It'll get ugly, Logan." I thought about it for a long moment. Claire was vindictive, no doubt about it. But she wasn't invincible. "Do it," I said finally. "Let's report her. She needs to learn she can't bully me anymore." The next morning, I went to the police station with Tom by my side. We filed a formal complaint, handing over the email as evidence. The officer taking my statement assured me they'd look into it, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "She's good at covering her tracks," I told Tom as we walked out. "She won't be good enough," he replied. When I got home, I found Claire waiting for me on the front porch. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that smug smirk I'd come to hate. "Well, well," she said as I walked up. "Big man goes to the cops. Did it make you feel powerful, Logan? Like you're finally in control?" I ignored her and unlocked the door. "Don't walk away from me," she snapped, following me inside. "You think you can just lock me out of my own house, report me to HR, and now this? You're pathetic, Logan. Always have been." I turned to face her, my anger bubbling to the surface. "No, Claire. You're pathetic. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. The police are involved now, and when this all comes crashing down, you'll have no one to blame but yourself." For a moment, I thought I saw fear flicker across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're making a mistake," she said coldly. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I shot back. "But at least I'll regret it on my own terms." The next few days were tense. Claire moved out temporarily, likely to avoid being served with divorce papers or dealing with the police investigation. But her absence didn't mean the drama was over. One night, I came home to find my car vandalized. The tires were slashed, and someone had spray-painted the word "loser" across the driver's side door. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. I filed another police report, but I knew it wouldn't go anywhere without evidence. Claire was too clever to get caught red-handed. Still, the act of vandalism felt desperate. She was losing control, and she knew it. The turning point came a week later when Tom called me with an update. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. HR completed their investigation into Claire and Evan. They've both been fired, effective immediately. I couldn't help but laugh. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. "Good," I said. "That's one less thing she can hold over me." But Tom wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. "The police traced the email she sent you. Turns out, she used a work device to send it, big mistake on her part. They're building a case against her for cyber harassment." For the first time in this whole mess, I felt like I was winning. Later that night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Logan," Claire's voice came through the line, shaky and unsteady. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. I messed up," she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard it. "I went too far. Can we put this all behind us?" I almost laughed. The audacity of this woman was unbelievable. "No, Claire," I said firmly. "We can't. You made your bed, now lie in it." She started to argue, but I hung up before she could finish. The next day, I finalized the paperwork for the divorce. Claire's games were over, and I wasn't sticking around to see what her next move would be. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. When the divorce papers were officially filed, I thought I'd feel a sense of relief, maybe even triumph. Instead, I sat in my living room, staring at the stack of legal documents, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and exhaustion. The storm was over, but the wreckage it left behind was overwhelming. Claire, as expected, didn't take the divorce filing quietly. Her threats and insults continued, though now they came through her lawyer. Every time I thought I'd cut her out of my life, she found a new way to wedge herself back in. If it wasn't an aggressive text, it was a petty demand in the divorce settlement. I needed a distraction. Something to remind me that my life wasn't just a series of battles with a vindictive ex-wife. That's when I remembered a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Sarah. Sarah had been a close friend back in college. We'd lost touch after graduation, but I remembered her as one of the few people who could make me laugh when life got hard. A few months ago, she'd sent me a friendly text, asking how I was doing. At the time, I was too deep in the chaos with Claire to respond, but now I found myself scrolling through my messages until I found hers. "Hey," I typed. "Sorry for the late reply. Things have been complicated. How've you been?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Logan. I thought you forgot about me. I'm good, crazy busy with work, but nothing I can't handle. What about you? What's going on?" For some reason, I didn't sugarcoat my response. "I'm getting divorced," I wrote. "It's been a nightmare." I expected her to respond with pity or awkward condolences, but instead, she called me. "Divorced?" she said when I answered. "Logan, what happened? You always seemed so solid." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, Claire turned out to be anything but solid. Let's just say she had more extracurricular activities than I realized." Sarah gasped. "No way. She cheated on you?" "With 2 guys," I said, shaking my head. "And she wasn't exactly subtle about it." "What a witch," Sarah said, catching herself before saying something worse. "You didn't deserve that." Talking to her felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't replaying arguments with Claire or planning my next move. I was just talking. We ended the call with a plan to meet for coffee later in the week. It wasn't a date, I wasn't ready for anything like that, but it felt good to reconnect with someone who reminded me of a time when my life wasn't so chaotic. The next few days were surprisingly peaceful. Claire's lawyer stopped calling as frequently, and I started to see glimpses of what my life could look like without her. I went to the gym for the first time in months, caught up on work, and even started fixing up the house, small repairs I'd been putting off for years. But, of course, peace never lasted long where Claire was concerned. It was a Friday evening when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Claire standing on the porch, holding a large box. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, setting the box down on the coffee table. "I'm here to pick up the rest of my stuff," she said, her tone sharp. "And to give you this." She pulled an envelope from her purse and tossed it onto the table. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up. "Evidence," she said smugly. "Proof that you've been bad-mouthing me to everyone in town. My lawyer's going to love it." I opened the envelope and found a collection of screenshots, texts and social media posts taken completely out of context. It was laughable, but the fact that she'd gone to such lengths to dig up dirt on me was unsettling. "You're really desperate, aren't you?" I said, shaking my head. "You've already lost, Claire. Just move on." Her face twisted with anger. "You think this is over? I'm not going to let you walk away and play the victim, Logan. Everyone's going to know the truth about you." I took a deep breath, refusing to let her bait me. "The truth? You mean how you cheated on me with 2 guys and humiliated me in my own home? Go ahead, Claire. Tell everyone. See how that works out for you." She stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind her. Later that night, I met Sarah for coffee. I told her about Claire's latest stunt, and instead of looking horrified or overwhelmed, she laughed. "She sounds like a cartoon villain," Sarah said, shaking her head. "I can't believe you put up with her for as long as you did." "Neither can I admitted. Talking to Sarah felt different this time. There was a warmth to her presence, a sense of ease I hadn't felt in years. We stayed at the cafe for hours, talking about everything from our college days to our current lives. For the first time, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, there was life after Claire. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Sarah. "Had a great time last night. Let's do it again soon." I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely." As I hit send, I realized something important: Claire didn't own me anymore. She could try to make my life miserable, but I wasn't the same man I was when this all started. I'd found my strength again. And I wasn't going to lose it. I should have expected it. Claire wasn't someone who took defeat lying down. The woman thrived on chaos, and as her power over me slipped further, her tactics grew bolder, more desperate, and downright deranged. A week after her dramatic exit from my house, I received another bombshell, a letter from her lawyer demanding $50,000 in damages for emotional distress. Emotional distress? The sheer audacity almost made me laugh. This was the same woman who had paraded her affairs through my life like a badge of honor, and now she was claiming I had ruined her peace of mind? But the situation stopped being funny when I realized the consequences. Even though the claim was baseless, fighting it in court would cost me time, money, and sanity, 3 things I was already running low on. Claire was banking on that. Typical Claire, I muttered as I stared at the letter. I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let her win this round. The next morning, I called Tom, my lawyer, and filled him in. "She's suing me for emotional distress," I said. "What are my options?" Tom groaned on the other end of the line. "This woman doesn't quit, does she?" "Don't worry, Logan. We'll handle it. The burden of proof is on her, and from everything you've told me, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. But just to be safe, I think it's time we go on the offensive." "Offensive how?" I asked. "Counterclaims," he said. "We'll file a defamation suit for the blackmail attempts and the fake evidence she tried to use against you. 2 can play this game." It was a bold move, but I was ready. For months, I'd been playing defense, reacting to every curveball Claire threw my way. Now it was time to flip the script. A few days later, I served Claire with the counterclaim. I imagined her reaction when she opened it, probably a mix of shock and rage. For the first time, she'd have to answer for her actions, and there would be no wiggling out of it. But Claire wasn't the type to back down quietly. The next escalation came the following week. I was at the grocery store, trying to enjoy a rare moment of normalcy, when I noticed people staring at me. Not the usual curious glances, but deliberate, judgmental stares. As I pushed my cart down the cereal aisle, a woman I barely knew from the neighborhood approached me. "Logan," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for everything you're going through. It must be awful to have all that aired out in public." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She pulled out her phone and opened Facebook. There, on a local community page, was a post from Claire. It was a long, rambling tirade about how I'd emotionally abused her during our marriage, complete with fabricated stories and cherry-picked screenshots to paint me as the villain. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of people, most of whom didn't even know me, were weighing in, offering Claire their sympathy and calling me every name in the book. "That's not true," I said, handing the phone back. The woman gave me a pitying smile. "I figured it wasn't. But you know how people are. They love drama." I barely made it through the rest of my errands. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking with anger. This was a new low, even for Claire. I spent the next few hours strategizing with Tom. We gathered evidence to prove Claire's accusations were false, including text messages, emails, and even character statements from mutual friends who'd seen her true colors. But as satisfying as it was to plan my next move, I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. That's when Sarah called. "I saw the post," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "Logan, this has gone too far. You need to hit back harder." "I'm working on it," I said. "But it feels like no matter what I do, she's always one step ahead." Sarah paused for a moment. "Then stop playing by her rules. She thrives on chaos because it keeps you off balance. You need to take control of the narrative." Her words stuck with me. Sarah was right, Claire's power came from her ability to control the story. If I wanted to win, I needed to tell my side of it. The next day, I sat down and wrote a post of my own. It wasn't an angry rant or a list of accusations, it was the unvarnished truth. I explained how Claire's affairs had torn our marriage apart, how she'd mocked me in my own home, and how her recent actions were part of a calculated attempt to discredit me. I ended the post with a simple statement. I'm not sharing this to gain sympathy or start a war. I'm sharing it because everyone deserves to know the truth. And the truth is that sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But no matter how hard they try to break us, we can always find the strength to rise above. When I hit post, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. I wasn't sure how people would react, but I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, my post had been shared dozens of times, with friends and even strangers leaving supportive comments. People who'd seen through Claire's lies came forward with their own stories, painting a picture of a woman who thrived on manipulation and deceit. For the first time in months, the tide was turning. That evening, Sarah came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the couch, laughing and talking like we used to, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt light. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, she said, raising her glass. Here's to starting over. To starting over, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As we sat there, I realized something important. Claire might have taken a lot from me, but she hadn't taken everything. I still had my dignity, my future, and people who genuinely cared about me. And no matter what she tried next, I knew I could handle it. If Claire was rattled by my public post, she didn't show it, not at first. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally back down. But Claire was like a storm. The calm was always temporary, and the worst was yet to come. It started on a Saturday morning. I was in my backyard, trying to fix a loose fence panel, when I noticed a black SUV idling at the end of my driveway. At first, I thought it was a neighbor or a delivery driver, but the vehicle stayed put. Curiosity turned to unease as the minutes ticked by. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. I grabbed my phone and started toward the driveway. As soon as I got close, the SUV sped off, tires screeching as it rounded the corner. Something wasn't right. That night, I got my answer. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through emails, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged me in a post on a local Facebook group. Against my better judgment, I clicked the notification, and instantly regretted it. The post was from Claire. This time, she'd gone beyond her usual lies and fabricated stories. She'd uploaded pictures of me, private photos from when we were still married. Most were harmless, but a few were taken out of context, chosen deliberately to paint me as unstable. The caption read, "Logan Adams isn't the man he pretends to be. Here's the truth about the person who's been smearing my name." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just petty revenge. This was a calculated attack on my character, meant to humiliate me publicly. The comments were already pouring in. Some people defended me, but others latched onto Claire's narrative, accusing me of being a liar, a manipulator, even an abuser. I couldn't sit idly by. Not this time. The next morning, I met with Tom. I showed him the post and explained what had happened with the SUV. "She's crossed the line," Tom said, his jaw tight. We can add invasion of privacy to the defamation suit. But if she's stalking you, we might need to involve law enforcement. I don't want this to escalate, I said, though I knew it was a losing battle. I just want her out of my life. Tom gave me a sympathetic look. Sometimes the only way to stop someone like Claire is to push back harder than they expect. Let me handle the legal side. You focus on staying safe. That evening, I installed security cameras around the house. It felt strange, like I was preparing for war, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire wasn't done. My instincts were right. 2 nights later, the cameras caught her. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed with an alert from the motion sensor. I pulled up the live feed and saw Claire in my driveway, holding a can of spray paint. Before I could react, she started tagging the side of my car with bright red letters. "Cheater," she scrawled across the driver's side door. The irony was almost laughable. Almost. I called the police, heart pounding as I watched her finish the vandalism and walk back to her car. By the time they arrived, she was long gone, but the damage was done. The officer took my statement, nodding grimly as I showed him the footage. "We'll file a report," he said. "This should be enough to get a restraining order." I nodded, exhaustion washing over me. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a war zone. The restraining order was filed the next day. Claire was livid when she found out, calling me repeatedly from blocked numbers and leaving voicemails filled with threats and insults. "You think you can shut me up?" she snarled in one message. "You'll regret this, Logan. Mark my words." Her voice no longer scared me, it disgusted me. Claire had spent months trying to break me, but I was still standing. And now, I had the law on my side. Despite the restraining order, Claire's antics continued. She couldn't come near me physically, but she weaponized the court system, dragging out the divorce proceedings with frivolous motions and baseless accusations. Every hearing felt like a fresh wound, but I refused to give up. I leaned on Sarah, who had become my anchor through the chaos, and focused on rebuilding my life one step at a time. The turning point came during the final court hearing. Claire had pushed for a larger settlement, claiming she was entitled to spousal support despite the fact that she'd been the one to destroy our marriage. Tom was ready. He presented a mountain of evidence, text messages, emails, and witness testimonies that exposed Claire's lies for what they were. He even played the security footage of her vandalizing my car, which left the judge visibly unimpressed with her behavior. By the time Tom finished, Claire's face was pale, her confidence shattered. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing her claims and finalizing the divorce on terms that were more than fair to me. It was over. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. Claire was finally out of my life, her grip on my future broken. Sarah was waiting for me outside. She smiled when she saw me, her warmth cutting through the lingering chill of the day. "How does it feel?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Like I can finally breathe again." She nodded, slipping her arm through mine as we walked to the car. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or bracing for the next blow. I was free. And as I drove away from the courthouse, leaving Claire and the chaos she'd brought into my life behind, I knew one thing for certain. The best was yet to come.